There is a place on Earth so cold that boiling water thrown into the air freezes before it hits the ground, where the sea freezes solid for 9 months of the year. No tree grows, no plant survives the winter, and the wind moves across the land with enough force to strip skin from an exposed body in minutes. No civilization was supposed to survive here. Every calculation about human limits suggested this land was beyond them, and yet for over 4,000 years, people have not just survived here, they have thrived. They raised children, built communities, developed art and language in conditions that would kill most people within hours. They didn't do it by accident. They invented over 50 technologies the rest of the world wouldn't discover for centuries. When British explorer Sir John Franklin arrived in 1845 with 129 trained men and the best technology Victorian England could offer, he believed they had come to conquer the Arctic. All 129 men died, not from enemy attack, but from cold and starvation in a land these people had called home for thousands of years. The difference was never strength or courage, it was knowledge. This is the story of the Inuit, the people who turned the most hostile place on Earth into a home. This is Aaluk. She is 57 years old and she learned to sew at age 5, not as a craft but as a survival skill, because among her people, a woman who could not sew was as dangerous to a family as a hunter who could not aim. What Aaluk makes is not clothing in the way the word is usually understood. She builds engineered systems. A single sealskin suit she produces contains over 200 individual stitches per inch in the most critical sections, each one placed at a specific angle to prevent moisture from wicking inward while allowing body heat to circulate outward. One missed stitch in the wrong place creates a gap that lets Arctic air reach skin, and in -40 temperatures, that gap is the difference between arriving home and not arriving at all. She learned this from her mother, who learned it from hers, in a chain of women who held the knowledge that kept every hunter alive every time he went out on the ice. The men carried the weapons. The women decided whether the men came back. The Inuit have lived across the Arctic for roughly 4,000 years, from Siberia through Alaska to Greenland. The clothing technology women like Aaluk carry in their hands has remained the single most critical survival equipment ever developed for cold weather environments. When NASA developed survival suits for extreme environments, their engineers studied Inuit clothing design and found a system so effective at managing heat and wind that modern research still marvels at them. The people who put humans into space looked at what the Inuit had designed and decided it was already close to perfect. Here is the Arctic in January. The sun has not risen in weeks. The sky is black at noon. The temperature is -40 and the wind is moving. No wood anywhere, no clay, no stone that isn't sealed into frozen ground. A person standing here with no tools and no knowledge would be dead before morning. Every resource that most civilizations were built on is completely absent. And somehow, in this specific place, the Inuit looked around and saw everything they needed. Here is what the Inuit did with snow. They built a house from it. A temporary shelter, but a structure so precisely engineered that it has baffled architects and physicists who encountered it for the first time. A structure that by every material calculation should collapse under its own weight, and yet holds firm enough to support a grown man standing on top of it. Built from the weakest raw material available in one of the harshest environments on Earth in under an hour using only a bone knife and bare hands. The secret is in the shape and the sequence. Blocks are not stacked horizontally the way a brick wall is built. They are laid in a rising spiral, each layer angling slightly inward so that the structure curves toward itself as it climbs. By the time the final block is placed at the top, the dome is holding itself up through every block pressing against the ones beside it. The weight of the whole structure distributed so evenly that removing any single block would cause the entire thing to fail. Here is what happens inside. When the temperature outside is -40, body heat alone raises the interior to -7, a 50-degree difference created by geometry and compressed snow. Light a single lamp and the temperature climbs further still. Aaluk's mother described sleeping on a raised platform inside the igloo as the warmest she ever felt in winter, warmer than any modern house she encountered later in her life. The igloo is temporary by design because the sea ice moves and the animals move with it. A culture that built permanent houses would starve because the food is never in the same place for long. Modern Arctic survival training still teaches igloo construction as a core skill because nothing designed since has surpassed it. Soldiers with access to modern equipment learn to build what Inuit children learned by playing. But the igloo is only part of what the Inuit built from this landscape, because once you have shelter, you face the next problem. And this one is the kind of problem that can mean life or death in a place like this. There is a problem hidden inside the Arctic that sounds simple until you actually try to solve it. How do you navigate across hundreds of miles of white, featureless landscape with no landmarks, no roads, no maps, and nothing to mark direction? The outside world had no answer. The Inuit had one. And it is stranger and more compelling than anyone who hasn't heard it would expect. The Arctic is not indistinguishable to a trained eye. The prevailing winds in any region create consistent patterns in snow and ice over time. This wind-carved formations, known as sastrugi, run in predictable directions, the same way season after season. An experienced Inuit traveler reads these ridges the way a sailor reads stars, using them to hold direction across terrain that looks identical in every direction to someone who has not learned its language. Researcher Claudio Aporta, who spent years studying the Inuit in early 2000s, documented hunters who maintained detailed mental maps of trail networks extending across thousands of square kilometers, with specific named points marking where conditions changed, where hazards existed, where shelter could be found. These maps existed entirely in memory and were passed down through story. What Aporta was observing is a characteristic of Inuit knowledge that makes it both extraordinary and fragile. You cannot learn to read sastrugi from a book because the reading requires a calibration that only develops through years of moving across the same landscape in changing conditions. But finding their ways around their environment is only half of what kept the Inuit alive. The other half is what they ate on a diet that, by every external measure, should have killed them within months, and yet produced some of the most robust health outcomes ever recorded. The traditional Inuit diet is almost entirely animal-based. No vegetables, no grains, no fruit except brief summer berries. By every nutritional model of the early 20th century, this diet should have produced fatal vitamin deficiencies. Sailors without fresh vegetables died from scurvy within months. The Inuit ate no vegetables and showed no signs of scurvy at all. The answer was in how they ate. The Inuit ate much of their food raw or lightly frozen, a practice outsiders viewed as primitive, but that preserved the nutritional content cooking would eliminate. Danish researchers studying Inuit populations in the 1970s found heart disease rates dramatically lower than in European populations, a finding that eventually produced the global fish oil supplement industry. The supplement, millions take daily traces directly back to what the Inuit were eating. Aaluk is 57. The knowledge in her hands exists nowhere else in the world. It is not in any book, archive, or database. A woman taught her. A woman taught that woman. The chain runs back 4,000 years without a single break, and it has never been this close to ending. The Inuit today live across the same Arctic territory their ancestors occupied. From Canada to Greenland to Alaska, the territory is the same. The ice is not. Arctic temperatures have risen 3 times the global average over the past 50 years. Ice that hunters crossed with confidence for generations now behaves differently. Animals have shifted their ranges. The knowledge is still inside the people who carry it. The place it was built to read is slowly becoming something else. Aaluk is training her granddaughter to sew. The girl is 11, phone in her pocket, sitting still while Aaluk guides her through the stitch angle and the way to find weakness in a hide before committing a cut. She will probably never need this to keep a hunter alive. Aaluk holds the sealskin up to the light when she finishes a stitch, checking for gaps the way a hunter checks ice before stepping onto it. She finds none. She checks every time anyway, because the attention is not separate from the craft. Sir John Franklin's ships are still on the ocean floor. His 129 men did not last 2 winters in a land the Inuit called home. The difference was never equipment or courage. It was what these people knew. built stitch by stitch and season by season, tested against the coldest and most unforgiving place on Earth, until it reached something close to perfect.